So let's talk about amping up the Melters and Flamers on the tabletop with an overview of Vulkan He'stan and his rules in Warhammer 40K. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Salamanders, and for this video, seeing that Vulkan He'stan is getting a new model release, I thought it could be fun to do a unit overview for him, talking about his datasheets and options for using him on the tabletop. Let's talk about his lore and model first, and then go through his rules, talking about some of the ways to get more out of his damage buffing rules for Melta and Flamer weapons, and what squads he could quite happily run with himself. In the lore, Vulkan He'stan is the Forgefather of the Salamanders, a specific and powerful role within the chapter that's entirely dedicated towards the quest for the recovery of Vulkan's relics. They replace their first name with that of the Salamanders Primarch, study the greatest and deepest meanings of the teachings of their Gene Father, particularly in his Tome of Fire, and are then able to call on great resources of the chapter whenever they think there's the possibility of furthering their quest towards one of the remaining relics. The Salamanders believe that once they've passed the trial that their Primarch set for them and recovered these mighty artifacts, Vulkan himself will return to lead the chapter once more, which definitely seems very possible that he's still alive and out there somewhere, given that he is perpetual and his whole thing is not dying. So far, the Forgefathers of the Salamanders have uncovered 5 of these relics. 3 of them they carry personally: the Gauntlet of the Forge, Kisser's Mantle, and Adamantine Mantle, and the Spear of Vulkan, and then 2 more great relics in orbit above their homeworld, a forged ship and a great defense laser. The last 4 remain a mystery, and in Games Workshop's most recent lore update, it was reported that Vulkan He'stan was striking out at the Alpha Legion-held planet of Zero, believing that that world could have some clue to the location of the relic known as the Unbound Flame. In Games Workshop's latest lore article, they said that he defeated the Chaos forces there, and is now in pursuit of the Alpha Legion, who he believes may have made off with some of the details. With Primarchs gradually getting new models in Warhammer 40K, it certainly seems possible that he might reach the end of his quest someday, and the Primarch be restored to the chapter. For his model, as mentioned, Vulkan He'stan has now finally received a Primaris resculpt. His firstborn miniature had been rather towered over by the Primaris around him for quite some time at this point. The Primaris update stays at least fairly faithful to the original. A similar sort of pre-Primaris style helm, a burning emblem of the Salamanders above him, the Spear of Vulkan, rather than being in a striking pose, being held to his side as he stalks forward, some fine ornate artificer armour cloaked in his dragon scale mantle, and the big chunky flamer gauntlet that is the Gauntlet of the Forge. Generally, his miniature went down pretty well with the Space Marine resculpts when I asked you guys about it. It looks like reception's been quite good, and he does have a head swap option now. Previously, he didn't have a bare-headed option, and he does have his rather burnt and scarred one if you wanted to assemble him that way. He'll likely be costing £28 and $45 if you were looking to pick him up when his model goes on sale. I'll just quickly mention the channel's affiliate discount retailers links down in the video description. They can save a bit of money versus Games Workshop's web store prices, usually between 10 and 20% depending on where they are around the world. Element Games in the UK for 15% off, Wargame Portal for the same in the USA, Cap Games for 21% off in Australia, Tash and Geldy between 16 and 20 in Germany and the EU, and Fenris Workshop for 10 in Canada. If you were looking to pick up some Space Marines or anything else in the near future, a big thank you to anyone choosing to order through these. It does help to support Auspex Tactics. Let's get into his rules and datasheets from Codex Space Marines though. I'm sure we'll get some digital downloads for the new characters that Games Workshop's releasing, though so far they haven't given us any indication that his datasheet will be changing yet. The only confirmations that we've had are certain special rules keeping the same. I feel like there's nothing really too wrong with his Codex Space Marine rules, so if they do happen to do any updates at all in the future, I'd expect them to be kind of minimal. In any case, he costs 100 points to field in-game. It's basically a Space Marine Captain datasheet from Codex Space Marines. He's a Salamanders character, which means that if you're taking him, then you're only taking Salamanders units, so that's him and Adrax Agatone. And for his choice of squads to attach to, he's got either Tactical Squad, Assault Intercessors, the Inferno Squad, or Company Heroes. I feel like literally all of those have some draw. The Tactical Squad can take 3 Melta weapons, the Assault Intercessors can give him re-rolls for his melee profile, the Inferno Squad is one of the best units that he can buff with his buffing rule, and the Company Heroes are a solid defensive units that can keep him safe and maybe use his special rule for taking objectives. His personal stat line is nice enough, though maybe I feel like the fine details of his damage and defense aren't necessarily the biggest and most impactful thing that he does. He's a 5 wound captain profile model, getting a 2+ save due to his artificer armor. He gets a 4+ invulnerable save and a 6+ feel no pain at base. It means that he's a little bit tougher to take out than the standard Space Marine captain out there, but if left exposed and his squad shot down, then he's still definitely not going to have an absolutely great defense for the points cost. For his damage output, he gets to put those relics of Vulkan to good use. The Gauntlet to the Forge is essentially a fairly well boosted heavy flamer. It's a 12-inch range, gets d6+3 shots, so quite a lot more shots on average, and it's strength 6, AP -1, damage 1, with torrent and ignores cover. As it's a torrent weapon, it does have the potential that he could buff that with his own buffing rule, and could potentially mean that his squad's a better choice for using Overwatch with. You'd get somewhere between 4 and 9 hits with that weapon profile, which isn't the worst. If there's some valuable lighter infantry trying to move up close to his position, then that could hurt a fair bit. In melee, he strikes with the Spear of Vulkan. It gets 6 attacks at strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2, so feeling like at least fairly standard captain melee there. Not having a Power Fist style profile and not getting the Lance keyword on that means that it's not really going to be a threat against the toughest things like toughness 12 or higher. He'll do well enough against medium and heavy infantry though. Overall, between his range and melee, it basically means that he's just alright against things like standard Space Marines or 1 wound infantry. Could maybe have a crack at taking down a Terminator or so, but isn't really going to be a big threat to monsters and vehicles all by himself. What really makes him more interesting though are his 2 special rules. His big one called Forgefather really exemplifies the Salamanders and basically turns up their Melters and Flamers to the next level. In your shooting phase you get to nominate 1 unit that he can see within 24 inches, and then for the rest of your Space Marine army, any Melter or Torrent weapons all get to reroll wound rolls against that target. It's quite a lot more powerful than certain character buffs out there, given that it doesn't just necessarily affect his own unit, it could be applied to all sorts of different Melter weapons, including ones on big tanks. And they're both profiles that certainly enjoy full wound rerolls. Melter weapons have loads of AP and good damage, but might struggle to wound tanks and vehicles, and Flamers tend to be at least fairly low strength, so making them wound more reliably is a big deal for them as well. Practically for the units that Space Marines have access to, it really feels like just a couple stand out in terms of being particularly good for him to boost though. Maybe one of the most obvious being the Inferno squad, which he can join and also helps out their OC. Their Pyre Blasters now get D6 shots at Strength 5, AP 1 and Damage 1, with Ignores Cover and Torrent. And in theory, if you went for a full squad of 10 of those, then that'd be 35 hits or so on average, so re-rolling wound rolls on all those mid-strength attacks is pretty punchy. It means that mass flamers will be threatening things like Terminators and tanks. They average around about 3 Terminators dead or 9 wounds to a Rhino if you can get them all in range. Even with Vulkan's buffs though, I still feel like they do enough to wipe out more sort of medium to lighter infantry, but still maybe aren't super standout against tough stuff. I guess you could potentially stack with other things though. You could get the +1 to wound from Oath, or maybe a Storm Speed or Thunderstrike if you wanted to take down some vehicles, and getting an extra pip of strength up to strength 6 in Firestorm could be quite nice. It'd make them more relevant against toughness 10 and 11, or toughness 5 and 6. They could work quite well in Firestorm with the devastating wound stratagem as well. If they rolled an average 35 hits, and then you re-rolled everything that wasn't a mortal wound, a single squad like this could put out around about 10 or 11 mortal wounds, and that really is pretty serious stuff. Some nasty damage to basically anything in the game, though admittedly you are taking a big squad, a special character, and a 2 command point stratagem at that point, so it's pretty high investment. Maybe the other unit that his buffing rules work best with could be the Land Raider Redeemer. These get 2 big punchy Flamestorm cannons with D6 plus 3 shots each at strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2. It also has the side benefit of also having a multi-melter as well, which can also make good use of the rerolls. A big hitting general purpose profile is already very efficient against things like Termagants and Space Marines, so adding the rerolls again helps it to punch up. Just literally with the Flamestorm cannons alone, again that barbecues around about 3 Terminators or about 10 wounds to a toughness 10 vehicle. Certainly feels like Vulkan He'stan is going to be more tempting in a list with a Land Raider Redeemer, and vice versa. Otherwise, it does feel like there's a few units in Codex Space Marines that are just a little bit unfortunate in already having full wound rerolls baked in. Flamestorm Aggressors feel like something that you should be talking about if you're using Torrent weapons and you're trying to make them scarier, but given that they're already twin links, means that the Forgefather's buffs do nothing for them. And the same for Eradicators against their prime targets with monsters and vehicles. They'll already get 2 reroll hits, wounds and damage, so Vulkan He'stan isn't going to help them there. He could make them a fair bit more reliable against heavy infantry though. He does make them more efficient against Terminators, so maybe not wasted to have them both in the list, though ideally the Eradicators will be shooting at tough targets if they've got a choice. Maybe the other more standout units could be Devastators with multi-melters. I've certainly seen some people using these when they're trying to make Vulkan He'stan work. If they can get in range and gets a bunch of hits on their targets, fully re-rolling wounds is really big for them, and they do have mass melter weapons, plus they could potentially get those re-rolls from a Razorback as well. Otherwise, the other units don't really feel like quite as much mainline damage dealers, definitely not unusable though. Storm Speed Hammer Strikes are pretty efficient and could strip some cover from things. Their melter weapons are only part of the story with their damage profiles though. As mentioned, tactical squads are okay. You could have an Inferno Pistol, Melter Gun and Multi-Melter, or in a combat squad that Vulkan He'stan is attached to, and the rest just guard the home field or something. And also other things have multi-melters like Invader ATVs or the Gladiator Valiant. The Gladiator again is interesting enough, but does also come with shots that aren't melter related as well. Generally though, I guess if you were considering any of these anyway, then their value goes up in a list in which Vulkan He'stan is in. Otherwise, returning to his datasheet and special rules, he does have a couple more. He's got an objective claiming one called Seeker of Lost Relics. For this one, he basically nominates an objective on the mid-board at the start of the game, and if he gets within range of that, then he becomes OC10, gains a leadership characteristic of 5+, and the 4+ Feel No Pain ability. I feel like the OC10 is the biggest and most meaningful thing there. It does mean that if he's towing on to his nominated objective, the opponent's going to have to commit some pretty serious amount of weight to that to get it off him. Even just having him sat on a midfield objective in cover and not being able to be shot too much could cause some problems, and the Feel No Pain certainly doesn't hurt him surviving when he's on there. You'd have to slog through around 10 wounds at his toughness 4 and 2+ save profile. To help him survive on midboard objectives, you might consider company heroes for a squad that he could join. They are a bit pricier now at 105 points, but that will give him a tanky retinue with 16 wounds and a -1 to wound built in, and maybe just enough weight in the unit with a little bit more shooting and a bit more quality melee to make his overall threat worth it. That's to give you a 200 point unit that's not going to be too trivial to take down, and hopefully he could march up the board nominating targets for your other guns and then get his big objective claiming rule on the go. Finally, for special rules, he has Inspiring Commander. This one was added in a balanced data slate, and it means that he gives Infernus Marines in his army OC2, I guess basically functioning as troops for the Salamanders here. I think this one's fun enough, perhaps particularly as they're already a unit that's kind of tempting enough when he's in the army, as he buffs them quite well. Feels like the sort of upgrade that's kind of nice to have, though it probably wouldn't change playing too much. Again, could mean that the opponent needs to take them more seriously if they're trying to swipe objectives off them. Maybe not the worst thing in the world if they can be sat in the mid-board and might be in a good position to overwatch things that want to run up and take that point. Overall, between all that, he does have a bunch of interesting stuff going on. Basically a fairly fighty character, a good Melta and Torrent buffing rule, and a fun objective scoring thing. If you can get value out of all three of those, he feels like fairly good value. Though he's certainly not a super cheap character at 100 points, you are giving up other options by taking him. I feel like Games Workshop have done pretty well of making him synergise with the Firestorm Assault Force, the themed Salamanders detachment. It gives your weapons the Assault keyword and +1 to strength within 12 inches, so it's basically a very direct buff to close range space marine firepower, Torrent and Melta weapons being some of the things that get the most advantage, and then they're the ones that Vulkan He'stan buffs as well. It maybe feels particularly nice for Infernus Marines, with Strength 6 being a nice enough breakpoint, and also being close range enough that they might struggle to get all their flamers in range. The detachment has a bunch of good stuff, lots of it revolving around transports, though for Vulkan He'stan in particular, the 2 command points Immolation Protocol stratagem is a good one. Torrent weapons gain devastating wounds is punchy as mentioned with the Infernus Marines, and you can get loads of mortal wounds out of that, though of course it's a big investment. And the 1 command point for Crucible of Battle for a +1 to wound shooting the closest thing could also help tip the balance on the math as to what things they could consider viable targets. Strength 6 Infernus Marines with 4 rerolls and a +1 to wound basically wound things like Imperial Knights 3 out of 4 times. You could have flamers doing seriously meaningful damage even to big tough stuff they shouldn't usually be able to threaten too well. For use in competitive armies, Salamanders and Vulkan He'stan by extension do tend to be kind of niche. Recently, Space Marines have tended to be a story of Ultramarines and then the rest that people are trying to make work. Ultramarines both having particularly impactful characters and also just a lot of good options, so plenty of army archetypes that you could run as other chapters just often tend to be better off run as them. For tournament numbers, the Space Marines aren't looking super healthy at the moment as well. Tournament win rates are around about 44% or so, which isn't great, and Firestorm hasn't usually tended to be the most played detachment for them. Definitely not out of the running and one of the interesting ones, though it just doesn't really seem to have ever been the one seeing the most success in 10th edition. Overall, Vulkan He'stan's just been kind of rare to see on the top tables of tournaments, I think just mainly because Salamanders and Firestorm aren't generally considered to be optimal, even if I'd still argue that both of them are fairly strong. They do have genuinely interesting and powerful things. I certainly feel like he's got more than enough strength to be a really intimidating unit when played well with good combos in casual games. For my general impressions of how I'd be tempted to field him, he feels like he's a character that genuinely has a whole load of different options, and he could seriously make arguments for him being fielded in very different ways indeed. You could just try and get him right where his buffs need to be, put him with some OC2 Infernus Marines and load them into a repulsor or a drop pod, and be ready to spend some command points on them, either for Crucible of Battle or devastating wounds if you're playing in Firestorm. Or you could put him on the board, maybe in company heroes for a tanky unit to survive in the mid-board, and then mark targets for other stuff, perhaps playing in tag team with Adrax Agatone and his Blade Guard and a Land Raider Redeemer, and then he can mark the targets for the Redeemer when it delivers his captain counterpart to battle. Both Assault Intercessors and even Tactical Marines with their Meltas don't seem like they're a horrible choice for him though. If running him though, I'd certainly be tempted to take at least one unit that he can buff well, either a Land Raider Redeemer, Infernus Marines, or maybe some Devastators. Without them, he just feels like he's a bit wasted and is paying for a really powerful ability that he's not using properly. And then unless he's going jumping out of transports, he seems like he's got a fairly straightforward game plan of march towards his mid-board objective and try and survive there. maybe using cover or line of sight blocking terrain to help out with that, and making a judgment call whether or not it makes sense to try and expose him and his units to mark a key target for a damage dealer. Hopefully be able to get in one big damage punch with him, and even if the opponent wrecks the unit that did it afterwards, he's still going to have some value after that. Hopefully should be good enough to skirmish with some lighter enemy units, with some company heroes or assault intercessors or something. He should be able to bully some medium infantry and get some more value that way. In any case, I'm pretty sure we'll be seeing him take to the table quite a bit more now he's got a new miniature. It certainly sounds like a whole bunch of people have some good interest in picking him up. I'll leave that there for now though. Let me know your thoughts on the Forgefather of the Salamanders. I'll be interested to hear from Sons of Nocturne out there how you've been using him in game. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. As mentioned, if you were going to pick up his new model, feel free to check out the links in the video description when they go live. And a big thank you to anyone who does choose to use those when they do order in some model soldiers. I'll leave that there for now though. Thanks for listening, and feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming just about every day. If you'd like to support the channel more directly, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that links down in the video description if you want to check that out. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.